When I was in my 20s and I started training, it never really occurred to me that an injury would prevent me from training completely. It never really occurred to me that when I was 50, I'd still be trying to train, and I'd have to train around some of the mistakes that I made when I was younger. And so I think it's safe to say when I first started training, the first emphasis was on just as heavy a weight as I could lift. And it really didn't matter to me what the form was. It was pretty sloppy, pretty aggressive, and I paid a price for that. I began having back pain probably in the first year that I trained, and I'd go to the chiropractor and things would get better. And about 6 years into training, that back pain was pretty serious most of the time. And that was the year that I was preparing for collegiate national championships, NPC collegiate nationals, and the NPC Mr. Missouri. And both of those competitions, in my off season, I was around 240, 245 pounds at 5'9", and I was in pretty significant pain all week long. I'd get my knees calmed down just in time to train legs, and I'd get my back calmed down just in time that I could squat again. And it was anti-inflammatories and ice and rest and just trying to do everything I could just to get back to that next workout a week later. And so I went with that program for years. And when I started getting ready for the Mr. Missouri in '95, as I lost weight for the competition, as my mechanics improved because my core was stronger, because my cardio was better, the pain subsided quite a bit. But as soon as I gained weight after the competition, the pain was back. In 1996, I was training for junior nationals in the heart of the Midwest in Kansas City, and had really significant pain all the time, particularly in my back. My knees were just something I had to deal with, but my back was really bad. And then once again, I got down to about 4 weeks out of contest, and I felt better. And which was the first time all year that I felt better. It was just when I got to that lighter weight, took some of the stress off of the spine, that it felt better. Once I finished those competitions, I gained a lot of weight very quickly. And it was a point in the gym where it felt like I could pick up whatever I wanted to pick up. It's just literally, if I put on 4 plates, 5 plates, 6 plates, I could pick up anything I put on. And so I was really enjoying training that heavy until one day I was doing some hammer strength rows, and I didn't feel, but I heard a pronounced click. And it didn't really hurt, so I just kept training. And then once I got done training, it hurt. And so it was one of those just kind of deep discomforts that stuck around for a couple weeks. It was more pronounced than the normal back pain that I had, and I knew something was wrong. About 10 days later, I caught a cold. And you know how when you have a cold, you're just kind of achy generally. And I was at the house, and I remember miserable, red nose, stuffy everywhere, just leaving everybody alone. And I was stretching, and I heard another click. And at that moment, I couldn't get comfortable. I couldn't sit, I couldn't lay down, I couldn't stand. The only thing I could do to get comfortable was to walk back and forth across my apartment. I was in grad school at the time, and so I walked for a period of about 5 hours in my apartment. Just couldn't get it to calm down. Finally, after 5 hours worth, we went to the emergency room and said, hey, need to do something here. They tried to move, tried to manipulate, tried to do some chiropractic to get it to move. Nothing was happening. Gave me a shot for pain. Everything felt better. Went home 3 o'clock in the morning, went to sleep, got up the next day, stood up, and fell down. Literally couldn't lift my leg, couldn't stand on my leg, couldn't do anything with my right leg. And so knew something was really wrong at that point. I knew I had herniated a disc. I just didn't know how bad. And so I scheduled with a neurosurgeon to get an appointment to have that looked at. And it was about a 3-week period before I could get in to see the neurosurgeon. And so, like any good bodybuilder, I was back in the gym after a couple of days training. I couldn't do legs because I couldn't contract my right leg at all. And at the time, my quads were, I remember they were 29 inches in diameter. And within 3 weeks, my right quad went from 29 inches to 23 inches. It had no nerve supply anymore, so it just started atrophying. and it was noticeable. And my routine the day would be to pick up my leg to get in the car, and pick up my leg to get out of the car, and just kind of drag it along behind me. I went to the neurosurgeon, scheduled a myelogram, which is a spine puncture with dye, to look at the nerves. And I remember, not a comfortable procedure, not easy when you're 245 or 250 pounds to get in that position even to do the spine puncture. And I remember when neurosurgeon came back in the room, the first thing he asked me was, "Are you in a lot of pain?" And by this point, I'm 3 weeks later, and I'm not in pain anymore because there's no nerve there to allow me to feel any pain. He puts the x-ray with the films up on the monitor, and he says, "I've never seen anything like this in 40 years. I'm going to enter this one in the fair." And so he shows me the picture of my spine, and along the side of it, it looked like a potato was sitting out to the side. And he said, "There's your disc." And then he showed a cross-section of the spine, and it had a piece that you could see in there, and he said, "Do you know what this is?" And I said, "Well, that's the disc." And he said, "No, that's your spine. The rest of it's disc." And so the disc had herniated up the spinal cord, down the spinal cord, and compressed the spinal cord completely to the side. He said, "I've never seen anything like this. You have surgery in 1 hour. No questions asked. No, do you want to do surgery? It's emergency surgery to try and save your ability to walk." And so I didn't really have a chance to think about it. Just, I'm going to surgery in an hour. And so it's probably a blessing to not have to have the time to think about it. I knew something had to be fixed. First question he asked when I got out of surgery, actually the first thing he said was, "You're not fun to operate on. I don't want to do it again." And so just because everything was so thick, it was hard to get to the disc. The first question he asked me was, "Can you wiggle your toes?" Going into surgery, it never occurred to me that I might not be able to wiggle my toes when I came back out of surgery. And so I began to realize just how serious this whole event was. And I could wiggle my toes. One of the most painful things I ever did in my life was stand up after that back surgery for the first time. And it felt like everything was just going to pull apart. It was so painful in those tissues. They cut about a 5-inch section of my spine on the right-hand side to take out 3 different discs and then try to patch everything back up together. And so a couple things happened in my mind at that time. Number one, I figured I wasn't going to be training for bodybuilding anymore because this was serious enough and significant enough that it would limit everything that I would do going forward. And number two, I began to stress about the work that I was doing. I was a graduate assistant at the time. I was teaching weight training. And I believed that the people in my class valued me because of how I looked. And it was a real life lesson and a real surprise when I went back in there after losing 40 pounds that they really cared more about what I knew, what was in my head, what was in my heart, than how I looked and how I presented it. So that was a big lesson. The desire to compete again really didn't take long after my surgery. I had been back to work for about a week. This is 2 weeks post-op. And I saw in Flex magazine that Collegiate Nationals was 13 weeks away. And it just flashed through my head. It would be really difficult to get in shape from where I am right now to be able to compete in Collegiate Nationals in 13 weeks. And over the course of the next week, I decided that I was going to do it. I ended up prepping for that competition. I ended up getting second in the heavyweights at that just 13 weeks after my, well, it's actually 15 weeks after my emergency back surgery. And so I think for that, it was just really me trying to prove to myself that I would be able to do this again if I decided to. Shortly after that competition, I took a layoff, didn't compete for 13 years. We flash forward now, we're 25 years after that. And I'm in my 50s. I just turned 50 in February, and a lot of what I do now is trying to get around the problems that I caused when I was in my 20s, training so recklessly. My training's very different than it was at that time, and there's a couple things that help me more than anything. The first is we have such a wide variety of equipment here that I can get around almost every injury that I have. If something's bothering me today, I can move over to another piece of equipment. Got 45 pieces of leg equipment, so I'm always able to get to something that doesn't hurt. The second thing is a big part of bodybuilding is finding where the line is between injury and safety. and staying on this side of that line. And I had a hard time with that when I was in my 20s. Now I stop well short of that line, just to ensure that I'm going to be able to train the next week and the week after that, because it's a long-term thing. It doesn't do me any good. Today I train legs. It doesn't do me any good to push into deep water today if it negatively impacts the rest of my training for the week. So I've got to push as far as I can, be able to recover from it, and then still be able to do the rest of my workouts. Still hurt every day, but beyond the low back surgery, I've got a titanium plate and 6 screws in my neck too, also from the same kind of training that I did when I was in my 20s. And again, I didn't realize that you could lose nerve function, you could lose entire motor units, and it's a very real thing that you just don't think a whole lot about until you miss one of them.